Dave Sweeney, thank you very much for making the time to be here today too. Both of you are busy people and we really do appreciate your time here tonight. So Dave, for you, I put together a little sort of blurb. I'm sure everybody knows you anyway, but just to introduce you as Dave is a prominent Australian anti-nuclear campaigner. I can vouch for that because I watched just recently, rewatched the documentary David Bradbury made, A Hard Rain, in which you feature as looking much younger, like all of us. But it's a great little film, and I think we need to be looking at getting that film circulating around the country. It goes into much of what we're being presented with today. So I'm not going to say any more. Over to you, Dave.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Annette. And thanks to all the crew. Good to join you tonight. I'm joining you from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people in Canberra. I was involved in one of the co-founders of ICAN in the national campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, but also my main focus and a long-term job has been with ACF, the Australian Conservation Foundation, on their nuclear-free campaign. Now, ACF has really significant concerns about nuclearisation in Australia at the moment. Very deep concerns that align with what David Noonan just said about the impacts of AUKUS. And also very significant concerns around the coalition push for domestic nuclear power. There's very real nuclear costs, risks and wastes. And we very much view this as gateway or mission creep for the full nuclearisation of Australia. Elevated uranium mining, uranium enrichment and fuel fabrication, and global waste management, and particularly in the context of AUKUS. Now, there's a lot of things, starting with the coalition's nuclear plan that was unveiled, at least in part, in middle of June, that are really deeply concerning for ACF and others about this plan. There's lots that we don't know about the plan, and it's some fundamental and really basic stuff we just don't know. We don't know what sort of reactor technology is proposed or how many reactors are planned for each of the 7 sites of recently retired or soon to be retired coal generating plants that the coalition have targeted in WA, Victoria, South Australia, Queensland and New South Wales. We don't know the proportion of proposed future nuclear energy in the national energy grid. We don't know about water usage and supply, and many on this call have long history in this issue and know just how critical water and continual access to water is to ensure that there's not a meltdown in a case of an incident or accident at a reactor. We don't know anything about insurance or the regulatory framework or who would build or operate any future reactors. And possibly, most disturbing, given Australia's history, we don't know anything about waste management plans. And the waste of civil nuclear reactor, commercial nuclear reactor, is orders of magnitude more serious than what we currently have in Australia, and what we currently have is serious. We have intermediate level waste which needs to be isolated from people on the planet for 10,000 years. And for commercial nuclear power waste, that high level waste needs to be isolated from people on the planet for up to 100,000 years. Now, if you look at Australia's track record of 30 years of top-down, imposed, heavy-handed, divisive and ultimately non-productive attempts by both major parties to set up radioactive waste dumps in different sites around the country. And we've seen multiple fights and multiple sites, particularly in South Australia and the Territory. And I'd like to give a shout out to David Noonan and to others on this call who have played really important roles in standing up for community rights and stopping those plans. That gives no confidence that increasing radioactive waste, and particularly in the form of AUKUS and highly enriched military waste, it's a deeply disturbing situation. There are things, though, however, that we do know about the coalition plan. We know that it's an ad hoc, chaotic, contradictory political fix, and it seeks to unite a disparate coalition from techno-enthusiast liberals to renewable-phobic nationals under one policy umbrella. It seeks to cover up a decade of climate denial and inaction from the coalition when they were in government. When they had their hands on the wheel for a decade, they did nothing to address climate, and they did nothing, actually, or very little, to advance nuclear. But they've had their road to Damascus moment in opposition. It's a plan that also seeks to wedge Labor. And Labor are making that very easy, as David said, in relation to AUKUS. As there's a bill before Parliament at the moment, drafted and promoted by Defence Minister Richard Marles, which actually opens the door to Australia potentially hosting high-level radioactive waste from the militaries, from the navies of our AUKUS partners in the US and the UK. Now, they've had nuclear reactors for 60 years, nuclear submarines and nuclear reactors for 60 years. Not one has been decommissioned, not one has been had the waste disposed. And in laws before our Parliament, there is the potential, accepted by Department of Defence, accepted by the Principal Legal Counsel of BAE Systems, who are pivotal in the UK nuclear submarines program, accepted by all members of the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, that there is a credible possibility and a potential for this new piece of legislation to open the door to radioactive waste storage of our AUKUS partners. And despite that, Minister Marles has to date not amended that legislation. The other thing about the coalition plan is we know that it's an attempt to harness a Trumpian-style cost of living disaffection and couple that with site-specific renewable concerns and turn that into a voice-style resentment vote with no or limited connection to reality, evidence or truth. And probably the most overriding thing that we do know about the coalition's plan is that it aims to cement fossil fuels in Australia's future energy mix. The plan is promoted by the Minerals Council of Australia, and the big winner is gas. We also know that the coalition, the self-proclaimed champion of small government, free market, states' rights, is jettisoning all of these formerly foundation principles in its push to advance nuclear power. Announcing the nuclear plan, the coalition gave little detail, but they were very quick to point out that they were prepared to use and had sought legal advice on the ability to use Commonwealth override powers to overcome state opposition, that they were setting up a national authority to do the nuclear rollout because the existing generators, transmitters and funders of energy in this country won't touch nuclear, that they would override community opposition in the national, or should that be national's interest, and that they would use compulsory acquisition powers to purchase those 7 sites. The first time those energy utilities at that sites heard about this was when Peter Dutton announced it in the national media. So you wonder how serious they are and how committed they are if they haven't even had the courtesy or the common sense to pick up the phone and speak to those utilities anyway. So these are all the hallmarks of a command economy with Peter Dutton as Commander-in-Chief. Now, nuclear is not only demonstrably the slowest and most expensive energy option for Australia, it also has unique related safety and security impacts. And it's also, and this is a deep concern for ACF and many others, it's an active distraction to credible and effective climate action. And don't just take my word from it. Paul Kelly, editor-at-large at The Australian, spoke of the intended consequence of this policy and said that the intended consequence of this policy is to derail the renewable energy transition, to inject uncertainty into renewable energy. Now, we all know coal is on the way out. Most will be gone in 10 years, all in 15. Coal has been essential in our power. It's been the sort of heavy lift of Australia's electricity system for a very long time. But it's on the way out and something's got to replace it. Now, renewables are the clear and obvious choice. They're currently 35% of our national power. All the electricity in Australia, across the nation, every day, 1/3 of it is generated by renewable energy sources. It's proven, it's deployable, it's vastly safer and cheaper. In ACT, where I am talking tonight, 100% of the power is renewable. In Tasmania, 100% of the power. In South Australia, where David Noonan is, 75% of the power en route, looking at 100% of the power by the end of this decade. Like, these things are not starting at the same place. Nuclear is illegal. It has massive legal, policy, economic and social licence constraints. It has been said repeatedly by independent analysis, including the Australian Energy Market Operator and the CSIRO, that it is simply the slowest and the most expensive energy option. And at the same time, renewables is 35% of the power, growing every day. Now, to interrupt the renewable rollout, really, it's nothing short of economic and environmental sabotage. And I think it's really critical to reinforce that it's not just the usual suspects who are concerned or opposed to the Coalition's nuclear plan. The energy utilities, AGL, Alinta, Energy Australia, Origin, they've all dismissed the nuclear option. Investors, the IFM, which manages over 200 billion in Australian super funds, has said no nuclear investment, stating that there was no social licence and the waste problems were too severe. There was a recent survey by the Investor Group on climate change, and it asked major institutional investors who have $37 trillion under management, which climate and energy solutions have the best long-term prospects of success and return. And they provided 14 options. And though that came back renewables first and nuclear last. And that was explained not because of ideology, not because of fear-mongering, not because of Chicken Little. It was explained because nuclear is very high cost, the lack of maturity and deployment in next-generation technology and superior alternatives. So the crew who toss coal around Parliament now want to cap and scrap our renewable energy future. And from the perspective of a group, an environment organisation like ACF, that just simply can't happen. It simply can't happen. We are in a time coming to a T-junction in Australian energy. We are exiting coal. We can either replace it with nuclear and fossil fuels, or we can replace it with renewables. Now, on our side of the fence, those who are saying, let's be serious about this, we're 1/3 of the way there, don't change course to go for something that is easily weaponizable, creates a lasting, effectively forever waste burden, is expensive and slow. Like, if we only had the choice between nuclear and coal, it'd be a difficult decision, but we are blessed with massive renewable resources here. And we've got lots of good supporters who see this. We've got federal prohibitions. It's important to remember that what is being proposed by the Coalition is unlawful in Australian law, a law that they introduced last century, a law that they did not challenge or seek to repeal when they had control of the country for a decade. There's also state laws and policy bans. There is opposition from the market, who are not convinced or are opposed. And it is very clear that on every objective analysis, it's simply not fit for purpose in this country. It is the slowest, the most expensive, and it delays effective climate action. Everyone from Alan Finkel to a range of commentators have said this. Now, if we lived in reasonable, rational times, we'd say, well, you put all those things together, superior alternatives, high cost, slow, game over. But we don't live in those times, and we've seen that. And we've seen one thing that the Coalition and Peter Dutton can do extremely well is harness discontent. And we're living in times where there's discontent, where there's fear, where there's uncertainty. And you don't try and maturely tease that out. You turn that into a slogan that it's someone else's fault and we're the solution. In this case, nuclear is the solution. So we will face a elevated social media push, much of it unhinged or untethered and all of it unhelpful. some explicitly misinformation, like misinformation going around that, renewables kills whales, misinformation going around that nuclear is zero carbon, that radioactive waste is sorted, it's an asset, not a threat, and on it rolls. So we need to, all of us, as part of our work to build a peaceful Australia, is to ensure that our advocacy for a nuclear-free Australia articulates a clear and consistent critique, and also identifies a pathway that is not only possible, but it's happening, and we're 35% there. And that is through renewables. Our energy future is renewable, not radioactive. And as has been said, all of us need to become nuclear-free advocates, at least up to the next election. Now, I could talk a lot about the technology, a lot about the strategies and all that sort of stuff, but I won't. We can do that. I want to leave some time for question and answer. I want to say, though, that we as an environment group share deep concerns about the increased nuclear militarisation, the increased nuclearisation in general, and the active demonisation and attempts to undermine much more sustainable and possible energy futures. I've popped in the chat a website. There's so much stuff around, but one website that I'd really draw people's attention to and say, have a look at your time and in your leisure, is a new initiative called Don't Nuke the Climate. And it is aiming to be credible, contemporary, pretty comprehensive, to link communities in those 7 sites that are under focus from the coalition, and to provide pretty clear and compelling and accessible information about the problems with nuclear energy and the multiple benefits and options provided by renewable energy. So look, I'll finish there just to say that this is a high cost, high risk, not fit for purpose option. It is linked to a whole range of increasingly disturbing and non-declared agendas about wider nuclearisation, including militarisation and international waste storage. And we actually have far superior alternatives, and we need to actively engage in this debate and push this ahead of the next election, which both Chris Bowen and Ted O'Brien have described as a referendum on nuclear power. So my sort of feeling and my mantra to myself is we have to work hard over the next 1 year to stop a mistake that we and our inheritors and our successors will rue for thousands. So thanks very much for the efforts in what you do.
Thank you very much, Dave. Yeah, very, very much appreciated.